Hello guys, welcome to our YouTube channel Book Review 360. So today the book which we are going to review is Orientalism by Edward Said. Before we review, don't forget to subscribe to our channel by clicking the bell icon so that you can receive the latest updates on the book reviews which we will be uploading. Before we start off, the let me tell you something about Edward Said. The late academic Edward Said developed the term Orientalism to describe how Europeans portrayed the Orient as inferior, uncivilized, and probably weird. But more importantly, Said also argued that this was also simultaneously about defining Europe as the Orient's opposite, like superior, civilized, and probably something wonderful. Uh, We will talk about the origin of the term Orient shortly, but first let's have a look at the background of Edward Said. Okay, so Said was a Palestinian who was born in Jerusalem in 1935. He obtained degrees in English literature from Princeton and Harvard. He taught as a professor at Columbia, Yale, and Stanford. He wrote his seminal work Orientalism in 1978 and died in 2003. And he had the experience of both the perspectives, both the Orient and the Occident. Okay, he was brought up under colonial rule in the Middle East, in Jerusalem, and in also Egypt. But later on, he moved to the U.S., so he had the experience of both the perspectives. Okay, so the origins of the term, the context. During the 18th and 19th centuries, an Orientalist was the name of an academic expert who spoke the languages of the East, also called the Orient, who specialized in art and architecture and literature and music from the East, who translated legal and diplomatic documents for Western European governments, collecting antiquities for museums, and so on and so forth. So, in effect, Orientalist was a legitimate category of expertise and knowledge. Let's talk about the origins of the term. The actual term, the Orient, refers to the rising of the sun in the east and comes from the Latin word oriens, Oriens, oriens. So we can think of Orientalism as Easternism or stereotyping of the East. Orientalism, of course, then becomes form of knowledge that authorizes and justifies the assertion of Western power over the East. So in 1978, Edward Said redefined Orientalism. Previously, of course, it was a literary who had the knowledge of the East, but Said redefined it to mean precisely the politics and power in Western Europe, and then later in the United States, that produced something called the Orient or the East, and what effects these politics have had. So, Orientalism acts like a pair of glasses that distorts your vision and exaggerates cultural and religious differences. Uh, with these glasses, probably just about everything and everyone seems highly exotic and strange, or worse, fanatical and dangerous, even. Women in the Middle East, for example, appear only as exotic, like belly dancers, oppressed, and veiled, always veiled, with no nuances in between. And in the early 20th century, you might have seen men portrayed as exotically romantic or more recently as probably crazy terrorists and nothing in between. Many Arab Muslims and Asians embrace this controversial term to describe the unique kind of racism they experience. So let's talk about the significance of Orientalism. Said's key text, Orientalism, which he penned in 1978, has provided a way of identifying and analyzing cultural, academic, and political representations that are racist and sexist towards non European communities and histories. It helped to identify how such people were marked as inferior, for example, barbaric or uncivilized by the Western academia, and how such people were, collapsed into one another, thereby erasing differences of identity and history. For example, uh, all the East, Far East, Middle East, and even Western Asia, they were all lumped into one thing and identified as Orient. But in fact, they have different differences among them. Their cultures were more refined, and there were subtleties in those cultures. But the West lumped those cultures all together into a single term called Orient, and they were excluded from the legitimate production of knowledge about their cultures and histories. So before we fully understand the term Orientalism, uh, Said uses the word the other in his work, and by other, you know that it's someone who is not you, the opposite of yourself. Self and other are political, but self and other are politically and socially constructed categories. Other such constructions are, for example, race, ethnicity, language, gender, class, religion, nationality. All of these are social constructs and political constructs. Nothing, you get these things with birth. Okay, so what is discourse then? Once again, a key terminology used by Said. Discourse means the way a topic is talked about and written about. It is the set of meanings that is applied through the kind of language that is used and the connotations or words. So, a story could be same, but it could be told differently by tweaking the language you use, by words and phraseology to suit yourselves. Okay. So discourse is how a story is told, what language and ideas you use to tell a story. Example, you could tweak the words, you could phrase uh, to phrase the words to describe a same lot of people who are fighting for their rights, and term them as freedom fighters. And of course, you could also portray them as terrorists. So this is what discourse is all about: how you present a scheme, how you present a topic. So in that context, let's understand Orientalism then. Orientalism is the construction of a binary of the East and the West as polar opposites of each other, culturally, historically, politically, socially, and intellectually. So, what Said maintains is that Oriental scholars actually talked about East and West as cultures which were diametrically opposite. There was nothing common in them. These were the binary categories, and you have to study them, in isolation. For example, West had to study East. According to Said, the Orient or the East has been narratively invented by the Occident or the West as its deepest and most recurring image of the other. That is all that the West is not. This means that the West becomes centered, becomes the reference point, which involves judgment and value. And that is where the problem begins. And that is what the whole discourse of Orientalism is about. That you are judging the Eastern cultures with the reference point of West. So that brings into play the judgment. And you shouldn't be judging a culture subjectively. Okay, you should judge a culture on its own, and that is what the major flaw is in the Western knowledge of the East. So w- but is there any difference between Orientalism and stereotyping? Well, yes and no, of course. Because Orientalism is about a much broader set of power relations. For example, when the US government views the Middle East through Oriental glasses, it creates policies with far reaching consequences, from outright war waged on other countries to imposing a travel ban on whole groups of people. So, the trick here is that probably Orientalism is not fueled by ignorance or simply a lack of knowledge, but rather the opposite. It has historically been produced as knowledge by those in positions of power, whether government officials, religious figures, or the media. For example, when Trump stated, quote unquote, I think Islam hates us. We can't allow people coming into this country who have this hatred for the United States. With this statement, he effectively characterized the 1.6 billion Muslims worldwide as anti American. So, Orientalism in today's world, where can we find Orientalist representations? In TV shows, films, literature, public opinion, government policies, foreign policy, and academia. For example, let's suppose talk about the movies. This is a famous movie which you might have seen. and it represents the Orient in a stereotypical way, that how they dress and how, their attire, and how they carry animals and their association with the you know animals like medieval times. So this is how it is still portrayed in the movies. And even Disney is not uh, without this bias, this Oriental bias. This is the movie The Dictator, which you can see. It's highly controversial movie. uh, these are the two contrasting images. For example, if you take that this is something normal and you don't question these things, then probably you are being bought into the idea which side is against. That if people are unhappy about something, then probably in the West they will be revolting. They won't be revolting, they will be peacefully demonstrating. And whereas in the East they will be probably taking up guns, AK-47s, to demonstrate and put forth their needs. And this is what Said wanted to tell us, that this is not how it is always. There might be some cases, but we shouldn't be stereotyping this. Orientalism, even today, it continues because it is so ingrained in how we see other peoples and cultures that it goes unnoticed. Even the term the Middle East is considered to be Orientalist because it standardizes a Western viewpoint by referring to West Asia in North Africa as the middle of the East. Much of what counts as knowledge about the Middle East and parts of Asia is still produced through those distorting and reductive glasses. And just like in 18th and 19th centuries, Orientalism remains powerful because it shapes not just how people in the West view the East, but also how they view themselves. Uh, Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe, because this way you will be getting updates about the videos which we'll be uploading. Of course, we'll be uploading more videos on Orientalism. We'll be analyzing it and discussing it, different facets of this, because this is a very complex uh, it's not simply a book, it's a discourse. Okay, so goodbye.